There is no better person in the world at waking people up to liberty than
From Acapulco, Mexico, this is Anarchast.
Greetings, toilet paper hoarders. I am Patrick Smith. Welcome to Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. Today we have the Larken Rose. Welcome to the show, Larken.
Thank you so much for having me.
So you might have noticed, maybe, that I am not, in fact, Jeff Berwick. So I'm going to be doing the best I can. But we may or may not be in Acapulco right now. So I'll leave that up to the viewers to decide. But no, it is an absolute honor to be given this opportunity to host Anarchast. And I can think of literally no other person in the world that I would rather be my first guest on this show than you, Larken. So again, I really, really appreciate you being here. And you've got some cool stuff to talk about today. So let's just get into it. So the first question I have to ask you, though, Larken, is how did you become an anarchist?
It was so long ago, I can barely remember.
And I'm sure you've been asked that question before on this show, right? But that kind of leads into what you wanted to talk about today, right?
Right. In fact, I'm coming up on my quarter of a century of being an anarchist now. It was 1996. I don't know the exact month. I do remember that because I was ex-Ragnar 1996 in AOL chat rooms when I gave up statism entirely. And it was, I didn't have sort of anarchist influences pulling me in that direction. It was weird. Like most people I know said, well, I saw this video or I read this book or something. The closest thing was that Tessa and I would talk about things and discuss concepts and principles, and we were already sort of libertarianish, and we both kind of fell off the spectrum by accident just by trying to be consistent in what we believe. I was sort of constitutionalist, right-leaning statist, and I could, tell you perfectly well and zealously why taxation for a welfare state was immoral and unjust and illegitimate and unconstitutional and a few other things. But I still made weird excuses for why, well, we have to have taxes to pay for police and the military and whatever else. And just little by little, I was whittling away the pieces of authoritarianism that made my own position inconsistent. And like I said, I would talk to Tessa and we would discuss things and talk to other people and stuff until I whittled away so much that I said, now I have the perfect ideal government. It's not government anymore. It's just people being people. And I realized I had accidentally become an anarchist because the government I advocated wasn't government anymore. It was just people voluntarily cooperating and doing stuff. And so I fell off the spectrum by figuring out there cannot be such a thing as legitimate political authority, regardless of what works or what doesn't. It's just like if there isn't Santa Claus, then and it's a little bit weird. Calling myself an anarchist feels a little bit like calling myself an anti-Santa Clausist. It's not so much I advocate against having this thing. It's that thing's fake and people should stop imagining it to be real. But anyway, that was almost a quarter of a century ago.
A quarter of a century is a very, very long time, not to make you feel old. But I don't know any anarchists that have been anarchists that long, I believe. I mean, I could be wrong, but that's a long time. So you have seen sort of this movement, whatever movement means, right? You've seen this movement start at nothing and grow. Can you tell us what it was like 25 years ago or whatever, quarter century ago?
I am so glad that most of the voluntarists alive today don't have to have the experience of being the only one in the world they know who believes that. Because that sucked. And I think I knew none. I knew none in real life. And I think there were 2 online that I knew early on and hadn't even met them in person. And it was that way. It wasn't I don't think I got over 10 people I knew in the world in the first 5 or 10 years of doing this. And wow, talk about frustrating and feeling hopeless. And I'm just so stupid and stubborn that I kept trying anyway. But it's so encouraging now. And I sort of have to chuckle at people who have been anarchists for like 5 minutes and they're like, oh, I try to talk to people, it just doesn't work, I give up. It's like, really? After 5 minutes, huh? But it's
back in my day. I'm waiting for you to roll out the back in my day line.
Nobody was around. But if you had told me a quarter century ago that I would live to see a time when I knew tens of thousands of anarchists, I'd say, no, I won't. Not nearly. Like, this is like generations off. We're never going to be near that. And if you asked me like 10 years after that, I'd still say there's no way that's going to happen in my lifetime. And then suddenly you start to see the exponential curve going up. And it's been so encouraging to watch. And yeah, of course, we're still a minority of the population. And it's still frustrating to see how many people still worship at the altar of statism. But given what it looked like when I started, this is way more optimistic than I ever would have been 10 years ago.
And what about the speed? Is it accelerating? I mean, I think it's obviously accelerating, but like, to what degree is it accelerating? What are your feelings on like reaching a critical mass someday?
Yeah. Every once in a while I do a semi-scientific study and I ask people whether on Facebook or if there's a big enough crowd that I'm talking in front of. I say, everybody who is an anarchist 10 years ago, raise your hand. And then 5 years ago, and it's usually most of the people there, it's 3 years or less that they've been anarchists. And it demonstrates in almost every major crowd that it is, in fact, exponential. And I did that on Facebook and a bunch of people responded. And somebody nicely made the graph of it that shows that, yeah, it's an exponential curve. I think there's something... This is sort of bizarre and magic. I've talked about it before. I can't explain it. I don't know why it is that way. But I swear that to me, it looks like today, somebody who has never heard these ideas is far more likely to be open to them than someone 20 years ago who has never heard these ideas. And that's just weird and magic to me. And it reminds me of the 100th monkey thing that I don't know how true that is, but it looks like it really is that. As if when enough people start to think about something and understand something, for some reason it gets easier for the other people who haven't even thought about it yet. Which is why I say it sounds like magic, but it looks like that's what I've actually experienced myself in talking to random people now, as opposed to talking to random people for the last 24 years. And seeing the responses, it's very bizarre, and I don't pretend to have any explanation for it. But that's really good news to me. I don't think it's that much easier today to get people to consider it.
I don't think we've ever had a boring conversation. I absolutely love talking to you. So, and we just did one at Anarchapulco up in the hotel where we talked about objective morality, which was fascinating. You guys can check that out if you'd like. So what if it's just like the government is growing and becoming more oppressive over time, and so people are starting to grate up against the government more than they did 20 years ago? An example would be, so I'm an IT entrepreneur, for those of you that don't know. I have managed large development teams in India and in other countries like the Philippines. And when I would talk to those people, like people from India, let's say, about liberty, and I would ask the basic questions, like, well, what do you think the government does that you disagree with or that you find fundamentally immoral or something like that? Man, they just rattle them off. So it seems like in the countries where the government is more of a problem, it's easier to wake them up to it being the problem and to show them the gun in the room, because you can, I don't know, make those analogies easier. And the more this government, the US government, becomes more and more intrusive and oppressive, literally like we're seeing now with this corona. If I say the word, the video will get demonetized, but I guess it's too late now. So the virus, the virus, people are losing their minds, and the government, like in Texas right now, the county I live in, just quarantine something like 19 people, forcibly quarantined. They call them control orders. Like they don't even mask the language anymore. They're just like, we issued a control order, and these people are now forcibly confined until, I guess, they determine if they have the infection just because they came from another place. So like people seem to be running up against government more, or am I wrong? Like, what do you think?
I think that's a factor, but I don't think it actually nearly explains what I'm seeing. Again, I don't know what explains it, but so I would point to Nazi Germany as a very depressing example. The primary, and I've talked about this before, the primary opposition to the Nazis was the communists. Like, really? That's the grand spectrum you can imagine of, this is really bad. We should advocate a slightly different flavor of authoritarian collectivism. There's been really nasty oppression, and it's really easy for victims of nasty oppression to go, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad. But it is not an automatic leap by any means to get from this is bad to there shouldn't be a ruling class. What almost everybody does is this is bad, that's why we need who I want on the throne, and then everything will be okay. That's sort of all of human history, is bickering over on the throne. So the step from the current regime is really bad to regimes are bad and governments are bad and ruling classes are unnecessary and unjustified is a gigantic philosophical step. And I don't think people get there just by being abused. I mean, literally, most people would rather die than give up their belief in government, as demonstrated by the fact that they do. They literally would go along with it and then vote for somebody else and get exterminated and all sorts of evil stuff. So it does, I mean, it certainly helps as a nudge in the right direction for people to see firsthand just how stupid and inefficient a ruling class is. But usually they just respond with, well, that's why we need that's why we need the Democrats back into power. No, that's why. And so it isn't automatic that they figure out that the throne is the problem. They still mostly just think the guy on it is the problem, and we need a different guy on it. So I don't even think that explains it.
Yeah, I was just trying to pull up an image, like a graph of congressional approval ratings over time, because it's like almost as low as it's ever been. So I'm just trying to find another explanation. Maybe people are just losing complete confidence in the leadership or something. And so they're starting to, I guess, just realize that the consent of the governed just maybe was never even there or something like that. I don't know. I'm just trying to guess.
And notice there are examples of, like, look at the American Revolution, where, and even that was only like about a third of the colonists said, this is so bad, which is like freedom paradise compared to what we have now. But this is so bad that we're all the way going to resist. Basically, we're going to shoot at cops and be tax evaders. And it was only about a third of them, but they weren't of the mind of let's not have a ruling class. It was let's rule ourselves. And, of course, the politicians here were like, hey, now's our opportunity to make our own little ruling class and cash in on this, how annoyed people are at the current regime. We can replace it with our new regime. So they all the way had a revolution where people are shooting at each other and dying and stuff. And it still didn't occur to the vast majority of them, maybe we shouldn't replace this with a different version of the same thing. Maybe we should be free. So like I said, they will kill and die before they will question statism. And that's sort of the history of the whole world for thousands of years. But for some freaking reason, now there are lots of people a lot more capable of questioning things.
Okay, so I have an idea. Maybe the thing that has changed is Larken Rose and Candles in the Dark and teaching people how to wake people up. Maybe that's what's actually accelerating things. Maybe a large part of that credit goes to you. What do you think about that?
Well, I like to think I have a little bit of influence, but from what I see, the change is actually in people who not only haven't heard of me or from me, but haven't heard of the ideas at all. And like the first time they ever hear of voluntarism or anarchism, they're already more open to it than almost anybody was 20 years ago. So I can't credit that. And a lot of people will also say, well, what about the internet? Because that's a great way to spread ideas, which is totally true. But when I look at how open people are who've never been exposed to it, that's just weird. It's awesome. It's awesomely weird, but it's weird. And Candles in the Dark makes it a lot easier and a lot faster and a lot more comfortable and more fun. But people still have to, they have to have enough distrust of authority to make it as easy and fun as it is now. Because they still have to go through the process. They have to process it themselves. And part of Candles in the Dark is coming to realize you can't decide what somebody else thinks for them. You can only invite them to sort out their own garbage in their own head. But the rate at which people do it now is so much faster, even starting from scratch, even starting from, wow, I've never even considered the idea of not having a government. It's still so much faster and more comfortable than I saw it anywhere 10 or 15 years ago. I don't know why, but we'll see.
Well, it's cool to talk to somebody with like a longevity in it, right? So like maybe you can tell us like what has changed over a quarter century and what kinds of things are still the same, things like that. Like where do you see it coming from, going? What's different now?
One of the weirdest things to observe for like 24 years is the movement. There wasn't an anarchist movement when I became an anarchist. There wasn't anything. And the thing is, I don't want to pretend that I came up with these ideas. The ideas have been talked about, Bastiat and Spooner, and go back a gazillion years. A person here and a person there would bring it up and talk about it. And so I'm not saying it originated with me, but there was no mass movement in the US of people who understood that government authority is bogus inside and out. And it isn't just a matter of having a new, better master. One of the weirdest phenomenons to observe, and I'm still watching it today, is the movements that sort of spring up around an idea while it's catching on. And then you start to get certain personalities and certain organizations and a movement and an event. And I compare it to, the abolitionists, back in slavery days, where a bunch of people said, this is horribly evil. We should do whatever we can to stop this. And they had meetings, and there were certain people who were well known for speaking out against slavery, and there were organizations, and there was the Underground Railroad, and some of them were saying, we need to change people's minds, and others were saying, we need to totally break the law and start breaking them out or shooting at the slave catchers or something. And there was all the discussion and the disagreement, and there were personalities and movements and organizations and all that stuff. And to me, in the end, none of that really matters. What matters, it all has an effect, but what really matters is the mindset of humanity as a whole slowly inching forward towards, for example, the bleeding obvious conclusion of slavery is bad. We shouldn't do that. All of the stuff that happened in between in the long run doesn't particularly matter. What matters is we're now to a point where, at least most of the world knows slavery is bad. And we will absolutely see the same thing happen to statism, where it won't be that long before the whole world goes, I can't believe we ever thought like politicians had special rights and that we needed ruling classes and stuff. That's ridiculous. But in the meantime, we still have individuals and events and organizations and movements and, all the weird drama going on. And to me, what matters is the mentality of the general public. And the rest of this is just sort of drama that will be lost and forgotten and good riddance, because it isn't really what matters. Like the progress and evolution of humanity is what actually matters. And that's not to say that organizations and individuals and events don't do any good, because a lot of them do good. And when I see someone or something that I feel is in line with what I'm trying to do, I may work with them. And okay, now we're on the same road. And if you go veering off into the alt-right ditch, well, bye. Like I'm still on the road that goes to people being free. And I think it's important for people to have the bigger perspective where they can recognize if organizations crash and burn or individuals do something dumb, just who cares? Like the ideas, like loyalty to the truth has to be above everything else. And if there's somebody who you thought was on the side of the truth and now they're not, oh, well, bye, keep going. And in the long run, it doesn't matter, because no botching up of movements or organizations or events can stop the spread of the idea. Things can make it go faster or slower, but the idea and the understanding of the truth is what matters. And so having watched this for 24 years, so much stuff has come and gone, and events have come and gone, and this person rises in popularity and then that one, and just none of it matters. And in the end, my fondest wish is that nobody in the world will give a crap about my books or my videos, because they state the bleeding obvious and everybody will understand it, and I can go be doing music and stuff, because it isn't about any of that. It's not about the messengers. It's about the truth. And when it gets far enough, then it's just everywhere and we're done. And we can, go do more productive things than battling an idiotic belief system.
Yeah, when I was first studying philosophy and I was really digging into the really meaty, difficult stuff and learning, I found a few people that I really sort of latched onto, and I started to get to the point where I was like, wow, they have all the answers. They, have the knowledge. And then, they started teaching me the tools of reason and logic and how to compare things and look for contradictions. And then I started noticing a few contradictions in those people. And man, it was like it was a really tough moment where I was like, wow, there are no heroes, there are no one's perfect. And so then I went the opposite direction. I was like, man, the moment I find a break in somebody's reasoning, I just sort of write the whole person off. And neither of those extremes are healthy, right? Someone, and this is what I'm working on now, this is what I'm learning, somebody can have a whole lot to offer, a whole lot of wisdom, a whole lot of sound reasoning, and at the same time, they can have something weird or something off or something wrong or a little area where they're just totally unreasonable. And I'm starting to learn, I'm working through accepting that, accepting people for they are. I'm certainly wrong on something, and I'm sure somebody's going to tell us in the comments, but, I mean, go ahead.
And I think when your first loyalty is to the truth, eventually you get to the point where you just, that doesn't really matter. It's like, this person may be right about this and this and this, and on this, they're just whatever, they're totally wrong. But I think there is part of us that sort of wants a hero to go, yeah, that guy got it all the way right. Yay, him, listen to him. And it's just, that's not how truth works. It's the truth is all the way right. Listen to the truth, whoever it's coming out of. And the bad news is you have to figure out what it is. You can't defer to anybody. You can't throw away the responsibility to determine true from false to anybody else. You have to do it yourself. And sometimes you'll find somebody that you think, hey, a bunch of what this guy says is totally right on. But if it's ever off, why would you take his word for it? If your brain says, I don't think that's right, well, then don't think it's right. Nothing says, well, I agreed with him the last 9 times, so I guess I have to the 10th. That's just, that's actually very statist, cowardly thinking, to think, well, I'm going to defer to him this time because he seemed to be right before. That's not how truth works. And if we're loyal to the truth, none of that other stuff even matters.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing that I've learned is never to really distrust somebody that doesn't, try and teach you something while at the same time also saying, do your own research. Don't take my word for it. Figure it out for yourself. Mm-hmm. Reason through it. If you think I'm wrong, tell me. Those are the people that you want to look for and listen to, because, they're open to being wrong. And for me, I love being wrong. If you and I can have a conversation right now and you can prove me wrong on something, this will be one of my favorite days. So
that's funny, because my brother Sean, older brother, often says my favorite thing is being wrong, because that's the only time you learn anything, when you figure out you were wrong about something. But just the attitude of looking for truth and being open to that is, unfortunately, that's a lot of the challenge, to get people to the point where they dare to realize it's on me to figure out right and wrong and true and false, and following anybody else and blindly believing anybody else is just a remarkably bad idea. And logically, there's no way to do it. You can't defer that to somebody else. You can blindly believe them, even if they say something sounds stupid, but that just makes you stupid. Doesn't make them right.
It's sort of with freedom comes responsibility. and with this reasoning machine that we are, that we have as humans, well, that also comes with responsibility. You need to not turn that thing off. You need to keep it on, keep it working, do your own homework, come to your own conclusions, defend your own positions, sort of exist as a human. If you're not using this reasoning machine, then, what difference are you from an animal or a dog or a rock or something, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it reminds me of a pet peeve I have. And I've talked about this before. Like, on the one hand, you have the people who sort of want to find a leader to believe and go rah, rah, rah and defer to. And then you have people who are looking for people like that. And to me, there's a very big difference between somebody who understands something and then tries to convey that understanding to other people. Like a good teacher, when he's done, he is now disposable. Like, you now know what I wanted to teach you. You have it in your head. You don't need me anymore. Bye. Have a nice life. Whereas there are some people who they do the game of trying to seem so learned and so wise, and so I'll talk in these complicated, sophisticated ways, not to actually convey understanding to you, but to impress you with how smart I sound so that you will defer to me. And that is immediately, to me, a sign of BS. Even if what they're saying happens to be true right now, they're trying to get adherents and followers. And a teacher whose method is, I want to train you to defer to me in what you think, that's not teaching. That's indoctrinating. We have enough of that. We don't need more people doing that. Whereas actual teachers, they do their job and they're done. And then the student knows what the teacher knows and can go off, be a teacher. He doesn't have to go back to the teacher and say, what do I think about this? Like, why would I know what you think about that? But it's a very different approach, and you can see it in different people if you know what to look for. The people who are looking for followers and the people who actually just want to spread an idea to somebody else. Like, oh, I didn't understand this before. It took a stupidly long, uncomfortable. Can make that easier for other people to understand. And my favorite thing to hear, which I've heard pretty often, is people saying, you made it so simple and obvious that, I'm like, good. You understand it just as well as I do now. You don't need me anymore. Like, I'm not trying to make you intellectually dependent on me. And if anybody seems like they are, run the other way, because that's not what the world needs more of.
So how does that relate to what you've seen over time in the movement? Like, I'm sure you've seen figureheads arise and, look for an audience. And then eventually it's like you sort of find them out. It's like they sort of reveal themselves after a while. And I'm not talking about any one person. I've got like, several in my head rattling around right now. But like, what's that like to kind of see it come and go and move over time?
It's frustrating to see how many people still fall for it. And I talked to a friend of mine, Josie, who went by Josie the Outlaw, made videos a zillion years ago that were awesome. And we talked about this thing of, if you could press a button and have everybody in the world understand what you understand about this thing you really care about, and thereby render yourself completely irrelevant. Like, nobody has to listen to you. Nobody has to watch your videos or read your stuff or care what you have to say, because they all understand it now. Would you press that button? And she and I would both like pound the crap out of that button. Like, I would love to be irrelevant. This is the bleeding obvious. Everyone should know this. I want to be doing other things. But I think there are a bunch of people in the movement who are not about the end goal. They're about the fight. And I won't name names, but I'm sure people can think of them. They're about having something to fight about. And the fact that they may sound like they're on your side at the moment, or they did at one point or whatever, if they are about being in the fight and not about spreading the idea to the point where they render themselves irrelevant, then they're not really trying for the truth, and they're not somebody I would follow. They might say true stuff for a while, and they might have a good message for a while, but if they seem to be about themselves instead of about the idea, then at the end of the day, ultimately they're, when they have to choose between rendering themselves irrelevant by spreading the truth or finding some weird, stupid way to keep it still being about them, they're going to choose still still making it about themselves, which means you're now an obstacle to the truth. You're not a helper of it. Like, I don't care what audience somebody has, whether it's 0 or 50 billion. If you're not subservient to the truth yourself, then you're sooner or later, you're just going to be in the way. And then the rest of us will just sort of step over you, find our way to the truth as best we can. And looking out for those people, and seeing so many in the movement come and go. And I even saw that when dealing with the tax thing, and I'm not going to get into all the garbage about the tax laws because that's a giant mess. But there were definitely personalities who were like, look at me, look at me, look at me. I have a theory. And I'd look into it and just go, your theory's bogus. Yeah, but look at me, but look at me. I was like, okay. So it wasn't even that you believed your theory. It's just you thought your theory would get you attention. And in any setting, in any field of thought, if somebody is doing that, it can be biology, I don't care what it is. If they're about getting attention to themselves, then you can bet that they're not about helping humanity find the truth. They're about themselves, in which case there's no reason to trust them or listen to them.
So from the perspective, so we've talked about like the bad parts that you've seen kind of over time in the movement. If you could, like, I know this is obviously antithetical to what you would want, but if you could express a desire to everyone in the movement, like if you could talk to everyone in the movement at once right now, and you can make a recommendation like that might direct a lot of people's kind of where they're looking to go, what would it be? Can you think of something?
Well, there's the totally self-serving thing of candles in the dark. Because I see so many people who do understand the philosophy, but don't understand all the weird things about psychology that get in the way of them conveying that to other people. And I'd love to see that many people having fun and being way more effective at spreading that. But as far as understanding things and learning, it's weird because I think most of the useful discussions happen between people that neither of them have an audience at all. Mm-hmm. Like it's, there can be this guy has a video and this guy has a book, but then there's thousands and thousands of one-on-one discussions going on with, somebody who's heard of voluntarism and maybe they know a bunch about it, or maybe they're just sort of thinking about it and then they're chatting with their friend about it. And it spreads that way like a virus, the good kind of virus. And so to me, my two recommendations, which don't really answer your question at all, is don't stop thinking about it and don't stop talking about it, even if you're not sure that you can rebut everything. Because so many people are like, I don't know, this seems weird, and they'll probably get attacked and everybody will disagree. Well, talk to them anyway. You don't have to get everything right. And you can get to places where you say, well, I don't really know how to respond to that, but here's what I think. And just have the discussions. Like it's not a wrestling match. You're allowed to have a discussion and not all the way know what you think, and build on what you think and help them build on what they think.
Well, that's what you're asking them to do. You're asking them to have that conversation with you where they're not sure they're going to have all the answers. And, you kind of both have to come to the table equal, right?
Yeah. It's sort of like, I'm not going to play that football game until I know I'm getting a touchdown on every play. It's like, well, it's going to be a while before you can do that. Just go play and see what happens. And it's just the mentality of having the discussion is 99% of the challenge, because when you're talking to statists, they did not get there by reasoning things out and having a logical foundation to a philosophy. They were indoctrinated into it. So they have a bunch of fluff and then some political mythology balanced on top of fluff. And that's all they have to work with. And they've never heard anybody suggest, hey, look at the fluff underneath that. Does that really when you look close, does that make sense to you? And a lot of Candles in the Dark is just about that, is asking questions of people to look at the fluff in their own brain and say, is this what you believe? Does that make sense? And it falls apart. There is no such thing as a rational foundation of statism. You can only believe it if you've been indoctrinated into believing it, because it makes no freaking sense. And so if you dare to have that discussion with people and you can get them to the point where they're willing to have the discussion, you have the massive advantage that their conclusions make no freaking sense. There is not an argument they can come up with that can ever make statism make sense. It's just a belief system. And once the discussion begins, their irrational belief system is kind of doomed. It may take a while, but there isn't a rational justification for what they think. So as soon as it's even a friendly, calm discussion, they're going to be drifting in one direction, and it isn't towards statism. But you have to dare to start that conversation, even if you like don't think you're the best debater or don't think you can explain anything. Just have it anyway. Talk to them anyway and see what happens. You're probably not going to make them more statist than they already are. So just see what happens.
I've got one. So if I could talk to the whole movement at once and make a recommendation, and maybe you disagree, I maybe you've had better luck than I have. I would tell people, get off of social media. Stop the Facebook endless, like, yelling, trolling debates. There is so much human effort, so much lifespan is wasted bickering at each other on Facebook, and no one is engaging genuinely. No one is actually typing back and forth with an open mind, wanting to be challenged and hoping to be wrong, like we're talking about. Like, no one is doing that on Facebook. No one, maybe like 2 people. Okay. So like what I do on social media and Facebook is I look for genuineness, whatever the word, I don't know, but I look for people that actually want to have the conversation and to find truth. And then I get them off of Facebook. I'm like, hey, can I call you? Hey, can we hop on Discord and have a voice chat? Like, I get them away from the keyboard and out from behind the monitor and actually like engage with them. And when I challenge people to get off of Facebook and do that, the ones that aren't genuine evaporate. It's like a really easy method of determining who's worth your time. It's just invite them off Facebook. If you really want to have the discussion, if you really think you're right, let me call you. You know, let's talk about it. You know, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's very true. And part of it is sort of inherent to the medium of, you know, random strangers get on and they scream at each other and blah, 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 blah. And that's why most people have never seen me do Candles in the Dark online, because they don't do it on Facebook. Every once in a while I'll try, but it's really difficult to do it in text when the person isn't there and other people are chiming in, making into an argument, because the focus of Candles in the Dark is not what you see on 100% of social media, which is sit there and shut up while I tell you what to think. And then, no, I'm going to tell you what to think. It is literally like one of the rules of Candles in the Dark is the only time you say what you think is when it's to agree with them. And obviously that's not how debates work. And it's not how social media works.
That was a non sequitur. That was an ad hoc. Blah, blah, blah. Sorry. I'm getting triggered from my Facebook experiences here. Oh, yes.
I feel your pain.
I know you do.
I've been through lots of that. And the funny thing is, I think a lot of anarchists and voluntarists would assume that how can you possibly get them to understand anything if the only time you say anything is to agree with them? And I don't mean, hey, just find common ground and that'll be good enough. I mean, bring them all the way to the most uncomfortable discussion they've ever had, where they are addressing the fundamental flaws in how they view the world their entire life. But you're not the enemy. You're on their side when they get there. And it's still traumatic and it's still difficult and they still have to process it, but they're not defending themselves against you. They're helping them through that. And yeah, that's not something you see on social media. It's not how that goes when 2 random strangers scream at each other. And so those discussions they accomplish almost nothing, but there really is a way to get a very different result. But your approach and attitude has to be very different. If your attitude is, I'm going to tell this guy what to think, it'll be the 8 billionth discussion on social media that accomplishes nothing. Except maybe the spectators might learn something. But yeah, that setting makes it so difficult and so unlikely for there to actually be a sincere, substantive discussion back and forth. And I've even seen it where, whether it's me in a status or somebody else in a status, they like start having something that's actually a substantive discussion. And then other anarchists file in and make it into an argument. It's like, oh, so close to almost being useful for 10 seconds there until somebody else dove in and botched it up.
Yeah. If you're about to get through to an ex-police officer, the last thing that you really need in that moment is 10 anarchists typing, cops are pigs, fuck the police, blah, blah, blah. Like, that's not really what you need at that moment. Thanks, guys. Yeah, no, we've been there. I feel like I need a meme war veteran hat or something. Yeah. Oh, man.
I was doing this before there were memes.
There you go. So it seems like the theme of this interview has been like your impressions of the movement over a quarter century. Is there do you have any other thoughts that you'd like to share, or any other things that you were thinking that you wanted to kind of talk about with that?
Yeah, well, with all the complaints and objections and things that people should avoid and stuff, I definitely want to end by focusing on the fact that statism is utterly doomed. The belief in statism is completely freaking doomed. Even though the majority of people have it lodged in their head, the movements and individuals and stuff, that's not what matters. The spread of an irrevocable, obvious conclusion is going to keep going until it's the whole world. And if you asked me 15 years ago, when will that be? I'd say 5 or 6 centuries. If you ask me now, I think a lot of the world in 5 or 6 decades will actually be stateless. And I think it'll take a bunch longer before the whole world figures it out, because some places it's going to have to seep into kind of gradually. But because it isn't about movements and personalities and events and this and that thing, it's just about what people understand. When we start to get where it becomes a discussion that lots of people are hearing about, statism is just doomed, because statism can't rationally be justified at all. So it's sort of like if you have, here's this little town in some cult doctrinated into this from the outside world, so they're not exposed to any of that. You take all those cult members and you move them all to the rest of the world, the cult's going to fall apart, because they're going to be exposed over and over again, day after day, to ideas that are like, oh, yeah, maybe what I was taught in that cult is really stupid and doesn't make any sense. Even if the statists outnumber the people who have escaped it, they're going to hear about it more and more people are going to think about it and talk about it, and the discussion spreads. And at the end, it's not about movements and events and personalities. It's about how many people look at this thing and go, yeah, what I was taught to believe is just stupid. That's bogus. That's the end. That will be everybody in the world. It's going to take a while, a very short while compared to what I would have guessed 15 or 20 years ago. It'll take a while to get to everybody, but it's going to get to a lot of people just in the next few decades.
Boy, that's a hopeful message. It warms my heart. It warms my heart. So to that end, you are one of the most successful people, one of the pioneers at disseminating the knowledge that people need to actually spread this message, to spread these principles of voluntarism. And you have a new thing that definitely needs to be talked about and make people aware of. People have been aware of your Candles in the Dark thing. We've talked about that for years now. We've invited people to all sorts of events everywhere. How many times have you done Candles in the Dark?
8-ish. I lost count.
I was going to say it's a ton, right? But you have a new thing that is all online, and it's a thing, and I'll let you pimp it, but I'm just saying, like, it is, if you want access to just about anything that has ever come out of Larken's mouth, you have a new thing called the Rose Channel. Can you tell us about what that is?
Yeah, basically the challenge was that, I have, 22,000 followers on Facebook, and 5 maxed out at 5,000 friends. And what I post gets suppressed into oblivion. I have 33 or 36,000 subscribers on YouTube, and they suppress the hell out of that. So there's a bunch of people who want to hear what I have to say. And most of them who click the box that says, I want to hear what he has to say, they still don't hear it. So you have this big controlled, algorithm stomped upon system. And it finally occurred to us that we really need to have just a place where people can go, and if they sign up there, they actually get all of, everything I've said for a gazillion years, and all the new stuff that Amanda and I do, and from our music to new videos we're doing. And Candles in the Dark, the online version, is there too. It's part of the whole package thing. We're just getting it up and running, and I want to thank you and Case and Bryden for making it happen at all, where we're finally going to have a place where all of our stuff is in one place, and people can get all of it without having, because I still have people say, like, I clicked subscribe and I clicked see first, and I haven't seen anything from you for 6 months. And I was like, yeah, I've posted like 500 things in the last 6 months. So it's the, going back to the old fashioned direct way of, here it is, go here, there it will be. And it isn't free. I think it's $30 a month, and that includes the Candles in the Dark thing, but you'll actually get the stuff. And that includes, we're up to 200. I can't even count that high. I've done a thing called the Unbound podcast, and there's 200 and some of them that will all be there, including all the old ones. Before that, I forget how long it was before that, but I did something called Snarkin' with Larken. It was another 200 and some podcasts, and I have to get those to Kaysen so we can stick all those up too. So you can literally overdose on me babbling about stuff. And then Amanda and I are going to be doing videos. We're going to be doing Man in the Street, examples of Candles in the Dark, where we go, here's what it actually looks like to do this with a complete stranger starting from scratch, because most people have never seen that, because we don't do it in public. And in fact, one of the rules is don't do it in front of an audience, but we're going to immediately violate our own rule because we're anarchists, to make videos that we can actually show people. This is how different the outcome is if you train yourself to keep your psychology in check. But all of that's going to be on Candles in the Dark. And like I said, I also want to be doing more music and posting that stuff there, and a gazillion other, I don't even remember what we have in the work.
Where can people go to find the Rose Channel?
TheRoseChannel.com. Oh, and the new audiobook of The Most Dangerous Superstition, as read by some crazy extremist I know, and produced on actually awesome equipment and recorded properly. So that's there too for anybody who subscribes to the channel. You can listen to your heart's content to Patrick reading my extremist book. I have to mention, I hope it doesn't embarrass you, that you said one of the problems you had when recording it is not getting too riled up when reading it.
That's exactly what I was about to say. Yeah. Look, I'm in my audio. I'm in my audio booth, and I have a professional soundproofed, insulated audio booth, with the nice mics and the equipment and everything. And I'm reading this audiobook, and it's soundproofed, guys. My audio booth is soundproofed. Sound doesn't really get in, but my wife starts texting me. She's like, "Why are you yelling? I can hear you downstairs." And I'm like, "It's this book. It's just so right. It makes me." And so I'm in there in my audiobook, and I'm like preaching. I feel like I'm in a pulpit, and I'm reading your book. I got the big screen in front of me, and I'm just like, I'm giving it like a sermon. And so I record large portions of the book this way, and we had volunteers that proof listened to the audiobook, and man, I just got first round of feedback. You need to tone this down. It really sounds preachy. It might turn some people off. And I'm like, and so I literally had to re-record it like toned down. But man, if you haven't read The Most Dangerous Superstition, I'm sure most of this audience has, but if you have not read that book or listened to the book, do so. It is one of the, it's a world changing book, man. That's amazing that you've written it. It was quite an achievement. So I'm
happy by how many people on Amazon, like in the reviews, said this will totally change how you see the world. Like, yeah, they read it.
So to the people that are always asking, how can they help? How can they do activism? we've just given you like 4 ways, right? You'd like check out Larken's work, subscribe to the Rose channel. The monthly fees, when you subscribe to like somebody's Patreon or Subscribestar or like the Rose channel in this case, and you start giving them reoccurring income, that's what frees them up to do more of what they're best at. And when I led this interview by saying like Larken is one of the best, if not the best in the world at waking people up to liberty, like if you free him up with some kind of monthly amount that he can depend on, that is sort of like a force multiplier. You're leveraging your resources. You're sort of linking your activism with his and helping him to do more of what he is really good at when you might not be. I'm not as good as he is. And so, when I support Larken with, the audiobook or with, whatever we do to help Larken in any way, that's kind of like I make my activism part of his activism, and I get to take a tiny little sliver of credit for it, which is what I want to do. I want to help people in the world, and that's one way to do it. So again, thank you, Larken. Guys, please check out the Rose channel. Give him a subscribe, sign up for that. Larken, is there anything else you'd like to say?
I think that's about it. Just dare to talk about it. And I'll be working on the mirror until I die or it's done. Hopefully it'll be done first. I don't know when. That's going to take ages. But that's one of the big projects that, because it's going to be given away for free to the whole world when it's finished, nobody's investing in it. So I can work on it, depending on how many people want to make it, so I don't have to do tree work and construction to pay my bills in the meantime. But as for what to do, don't be scared of talking about it and learning about it, and make this be the discussion of the whole world. Don't hide just because you think the rest of the world is going to disagree with you. They're going to disagree with you until they hear about it, and they have to hear about it from you and other people and other people and other people. But you might as well be the first one they hear about it from. Because if everybody sits around and, I don't want to be the first one, they're never going to hear it and they're never going to change. But you would be surprised if you learn to calmly make the discussion happen, how many people can suddenly be like, I kind of see where you're coming from. Like, I'm not sure about this, but start the discussion. And I know how, as an antisocial introvert, I know how hard it can be to start a discussion, especially if most of the world's going to call you crazy and think you're wrong. Start it anyway, because you can't help someone change their mindset if you never start the discussion.
All right, Larken, thank you for being my first guest on this amazing Anarchast platform. Guys, thanks for watching and giving me an opportunity to host this show. And as Jeff always says, until next time, peace, love, and anarchy.